Perfect. Panellists, please give them a round of applause and welcome them. Okay. So now with the introductions are out of the way, I think we should probably start with the basics. And I would like each of you to answer this question briefly, just so that we can get a handle on your position on it. Can fashion be viewed as art? Frances, I'll start with you and see where we're here.
I think it's a really difficult question, because I think ultimately fashion is created as an object for somebody to buy or want to wear. And it's a slightly different motivation than that of an artist. I also think that there are obviously aspects of couture or other elements which are right at the end. As you say, you talk about your Venn diagram, you know, there is an aspect which is right at that end, but in the end the motivation is a bit different. And that's what I think is interesting, is fashion allows and explores a lot of territories, but ultimately it has this edge to it which is about being part of an industry.
Okay, what do you think, Paul?
I agree with that. But I'd also say that I think fashion can become art, but the minute or the second it becomes art, it's no longer fashion.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, okay, interesting. We might return to that thought later. So can fashion be viewed as art? We'll take this side of the room. What do you think?
I agree with Frances and Paul, but I also...
Better get some disagreement soon, otherwise.
I think it's the overlap of fashion and arts where that makes fashion quite interesting, and it becomes quite creative, and you see another aspect to fashion.
Okay, so that shaded area is the most interesting bit. That's an interesting thought. Okay, what do we think? James, what do you think?
No, I think it's all about, you know, how you define these things in terms, isn't it? And they're both really more and more drawing things from each other, aren't they? I mean, a lot of the, as we know, people like, you know, McQueen were great collectors of contemporary art, and you know, so he's kind of taking some ideas, and you know, I think art's, you know, pulling these ideas back. So I think that, you know, I think it's all in our definition of what we call, you know, like artists, photographers as well, don't we? You know, people like Jürgen Teller, you know, who's a fine artist, but he's really a fashion photographer. So you know, it's down to the definition really, rather than you know.
Okay.
You know, whether my personal opinion of it is, you're asking my personal opinion.
Yes, your personal opinion.
Yeah, I would say definitely that it can be. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Carrying on down the line.
Agree. It's hard to start kind of adding to the debate. Yeah, I mean, what is fashion? What is art? Who's doing it? In what context? And I guess finally, we're in the year 2014 and going forward, I think we should be in times where there are less categorization.
Okay. And finally, Philip, what do you think? Can fashion be viewed as art?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree with James's point that they both mix, in terms of you could probably find fashion creeping into art insofar as I think there's a lot of art, I would say, that uses smoke and mirror techniques that are hard to maybe put an actual concrete meaning on, which could be seen in the same way that fashion designers pervert trends every season to push potential sales in retail stores, which is, for me, is the less meaningful part of fashion in terms of potentially being an art. I mean, I see no question in that fashion can be an art. I think it's very much the way you play it. I mean, I think, of course, clothing can be a medium of expression like anything else. But I think if you fall into the fashion category, you're potentially falling into something that is more, you know, trend-based, and just if you're going into just trying to create new trends every season so that people have something new to buy, then for me, of course, that's not that interesting. I mean, yes, maybe it's a smaller art in terms of it still requires aesthetic skill and taste, etc. But
more of a craft, maybe.
Yes, but if we're talking about art in terms of communication and communicating ideas and developing a long-term narrative and bringing people on a sort of journey of imagination and escapism, then I would say there's obviously a possibility of doing that, forgetting fashion, but using clothes to make art.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because as well, that seems to echo with what Frances said, in that it's about the kind of conception point, and that's where the nub of it seems to be so far. Okay, so the second question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to come to Zoe first with this one. When does fashion stop being a consumer retail item and become a piece of art?
I mean, art isn't worked around a price point, and so if you're making, if you're making clothes that's within the to consume and be retail, then you're working within a marketplace and a price point that restrains you.
It's the same in the art world, though,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's a tricky thing
You
to an
think so?
extent.
Well, yeah, I think it's, we all know the art world is totally market driven, and that's why it's becoming more and more like fashion. You know, it's all about labels, about brand names and things, isn't it? That's what it's
annoying,
become.
isn't
So you think, so you think art works to like a price point in that same rigidity,
Oh,
so it becomes just a product?
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be, but I mean, that's the way it's marketed.
And it's clearer today than ever before that the artists are brands and they have this name, this hype, as if they might as well be Prada or Louis Vuitton, the same people that are buying the, you know, there's that sense of, you know, desire and luxury in the name.
But are we only
It pumps
talking?
up
We're only
there.
talking about a handful of artists here when you talk about these.
Well, still, I'd say hundreds. I mean, yeah, talking just
In
like
terms of
luxury
how many
brands.
artists there are in the world.
Probably the
that's
same
not
as
very
luxury
many.
brands. There's thousands, millions of designers out there, but are they luxury brands? I mean, you know, we know there's only a few
But it's not
controlling
the same thing.
groups.
It's
Fashion's
not the
very
same
rarely
thing.
bought as an investment, I would have
No.
thought.
Well,
Well, more
It's
and
probably
more,
growing more, yeah.
more and more now, I
Yeah.
think. I mean, you have, you know, the dress that Audrey Hepburn wore, you know, in the image in Breakfast at Tiffany's. That has a value. That's beautiful. It's part of history. That has something that, I mean, it depends why you own it. Like, I hate the word invest. I mean, no, I don't buy. I wouldn't ever buy to invest. I think you buy to love. But there's some people who would.
but the
so I
function of
think-
art isn't. Art is not provided or made as an investment. That is not the function of art. That's not the definition of what art is. It's not a satisfactory definition on any terms.
Well, in that
art,
sense,
art is never
yeah.
made for that purpose.
But then it can support clothing, because the problem with clothing is obviously it sort of decomposes and dissolves a bit more than, let's say, a physical bronze sculpture. I mean, someone actually,
How about a painting?
someone said to me, well, quite, yeah, painting, I guess, but someone even said to me that fashion was actually quite like cookery because it has such a temporary nature. It's a fleeting creation.
Or pop music.
Yeah, well, exactly, pop music.
Delicious hot.
Yeah.
I think that in the end what we're talking about is consumption, and that in the end what's happened in the 21st century is that so much is about consumption and that people buy art. You know, I mean, there's been a lot in the press recently, hasn't there, about old masters and or you do think about, there was that book that was sold, you know, the one in New York,
Catechism.
yes, which went for $9 million and things
And all
like
that
this.
Nazi gear they found.
So I mean, it's just this idea that in a way people want to, by buying it, they're making a statement about their status. But I agree, it isn't the motivation with which the art was created in the first place.
Okay.
It's what we've done to it as a marketplace.
But I think there's also in the fashion world, all the brands today, you see they have collectible items that's their price point, and they attract customers that way as well.
That's,
Zoe?
No, but that's again, I'll go back to what Paul said, but that's not art, that's just a collectible, limited edition. That's just about commerce and
Missteps.
making money. And I understand there's some art that's maybe just about making money, but I guess when it comes, fashion becomes art.
Tell me a
It's
little
just
bit
the
about...
moment when you're just trying to use it to express something that you feel.
And
And you're not sure what that will be and how that relates. It's just an expression that's beyond possibly even the physicality of what a dress is. So does that mean it stops being fashion and becomes art? Does that matter? I think, again, all these things it's not maybe fashion industry versus art industry. I think maybe the question that maybe Paul was trying to answer that I got wrong about, that art can be commerce driven and is, but art and maybe is the key question here, not fashion. What is that moment? And then everything else gets defined backwards from that moment.
And how do you define it when in your working process? Do you feel like there was a change of some sort between, you know, starting out showing in galleries and those kinds of art spaces and then showing at Fashion Week? Did that feel like a landmark, or did you just move past it without noticing?
I mean, we're such a complicated company, it's just not an easy answer. I didn't ever study business. I studied making identity, making what you look like. I studied it at an art school in the 80s. I had no concept of business in my life. Didn't know what the word strategy, spelt, word, thought. I never thought about that. It's not why we've never been money driven. It's about how you feel, it's what you want to say. It just happened to come out in the format of clothing. And at points that got way more control by marketplace, and at points it totally revolted against that.
Does it make
selling
you...
is very vulgar to have to deal with.
Okay, well, this is
Yeah,
what
I
I
mean,
was just
the
going to ask. Does
tricky
that
thing
make you
with,
uncomfortable that the people talk about the kind of artistic aspect of the brand as a kind of brand value? I wondered how, both of you guys felt about that as
I'm a
designers.
brand.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the tricky thing with fashion is you still have to sell an idea 1,000, 100,000 times, whereas in art you sell an idea once and you get away with it. You take someone and you show them a pretty painting and you say, look, isn't this an amazing escape idea, whatever, buy into it, it costs you this. If you do the same in fashion, generally you sell it to the director of a retail chain and the retail guy goes, oh yeah, I love the vision, this is amazing, we'll stick it in 100 stores, we'll give you a check, bang. But then if it doesn't sell within 2 months, your creative vision crumbles and they actually go, well, sod that, we're not buying it next season. So that's the challenge of fashion, is that underlying business that we sort of talk to.
But again, the point is you don't make the painting in order to sell to the rich person. That's
But
not
I don't know about that. I don't know if that's true.
Well,
I'd
except
say
that I
there's a lot
wonder
of-
if
there's a lot of
the artist...
trends in
for me, it's absolutely
But
true.
the artists, especially that Philip you reference, I mean, I think in some cases, they did. In Warhol, you say, that
Yeah, it's
idea...
market driven, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a derivative of the contemporary time that it's in. It plays to those elements.
Is
of-
that what
of
appeals
art,
to
yeah.
you about it? About
Well, no,
pop art?
I guess the reason I personally choose pop art is I find it a very direct way of communicating. So for me to try and reinvent the way people see my clothes, which I try and put myself forward as a pop artist, fashion designer, really. So I'm more of an anti-fashion, sort of using clothing as a medium of ideas and fun and almost more of escapist. So I use pop art because it's a very literal, direct way of conceptually playing on the notion of what the clothing is. If I played with pretty floral patterns and abstract, well, then I'd fall more into the category of fashion because it's more abstract and more about trend and something short skirt this season or long skirt. Okay. Whereas I like to play on something that's taking almost everyday surrealism and almost part of a narrative of the development of pop art, but taking it into clothing helps people say, oh, isn't that funny? There's a matchstick repeat all over this that sort of makes you think it's just come off the table. And if you wear it with the sort of let's say a cheese grater skirt that looks like a cheese grater, it's like a painting because you're taking elements from the kitchen but you're mixing them around in an outfit. So what you create is actually this form of an expression, but do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's like,
I do.
We
Yeah.
say like a painter trying to look at a painting in a certain degree and trying to see it from all sorts of different angles, but you can use the body to do that and use clothing and the forms of clothing as all the elements to create a phenomenon in a way of the idea.
Okay, James, we'll pick up on a thought there, which is that, fashion is that the place where we all who aren't artists get to be artists and, in literally dressing up and choosing what we look like and...
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of performance artists, like their clothes is like their presentation of, who they are and that kind of thing. But I think following on from what Philip was saying there, I think that, there's this idea of fashion and fashionable. And fashionable is something that, however sincere you are about, how you want to create your art, you're still, at the mercy of what's in fashion, like how, Victorian painting went out of fashion at some stage and then came back and that kind of thing. And then artists.
Grayson Perry's brought it back in now. He loves it.
Yes, I mean, so
loves a bit of Victorian portraiture.
So we're also, things that become fashionable are driven by a sort of whatever it is, collective consciousness or something becomes, popular or appealing to people at a certain moment in time, whether it's, something goes out of fashion then comes back and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But that type of fashion is to do with a bit of taste and things to do with it, and a bit of avant-garde. What is the next shocking great thing, the new thing, or that thing is all very relevant to the whole thing.
It's kind of interesting that you seem to be saying it's kind of luck, and you seem to say that's the challenge. Tell me a bit more about that, because that's an interesting thought. It's the challenge to...
I don't know, I just don't buy this, you're lucky if you're in, and if you're not, then you can kind of grab onto the coattails of it. And Frank Dunphy always used to say that the money must follow the art, always. The art can never follow the money, because if it does, you end up disappearing up your own arsehole and you end up with nothing. So what you've got to do is you have to generate a field effect around what you do that is more powerful than any trend, than art history itself. But ultimately, what happens to your work isn't decided until generations after your death anyway. And you have no more say in that. All the money in the world won't buy you into that club. Because that's decided by future generations.
So do you just not consider the saleability at all?
I try
when it
not
comes
to.
But I don't think that's totally true, because I think the future generations are still slightly dictated around the idea, the stamp you have in this time. I mean, it's like, if art history books are for the future are being written now, then obviously whoever's influencing and getting into those books are obviously going to be regarded.
Philip, I can assure you of something, all the most popular artists from the turn of the century, you wouldn't have heard of any of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's quite interesting, actually. I was recently in Melbourne and in the National Gallery at Victoria there. I mean, they have an amazing collection of sort of 19th century Victorian painting. And of course, a lot of those people were, you know, really significant artists at that time. But absolutely, you don't, you know.
But I don't know if that's, I
massive.
mean, I think even now you've got popular artists, you know, like Jack Vettriano or whatever, and Beryl Cook, these people that sell a huge amount of postcards, but they're still not regarded as
No, I'm talking about
academic.
people who had massive cultural clout.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm just thinking about 19th century, you've got obviously the pre-Raphaelites, most of them are Sirs or late, whatever, you know, they still obviously were regarded at the time. And then, you know, thinking even further back, you know, obviously all the great portraitists were still connected to the king, were still very highly regarded.
But I'm
Do you know
not
what I
talking
mean?
about Rossetti or any of the. I'm not talking about successful in terms
It
of.
took him a while to get
But
to
even
it,
if you talk
let's be
about
talking
like
about
Mr. Ives
people
group or-
that you'd never have heard of.
But
And
look
these
at-
people had enormous cultural clout. They used to, when they exhibited, they were queues around the block. People used to. It was like.
I know, but maybe
there's
there's still there are exceptions to the norm, because I still even think like look at this in Ives group. I mean, so many. Looking back, there's so many very regarded artists that are very much part of the establishment that are still very much in the art history books. They're maybe not even as hyped as.
Do you think you can buy your way into art history? Then is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not. But I do think there's a certain element of the
Do you?
of the phenomenon of success that buys you into, like a Warhol, for example. The success of it stamps the validity of it at the time. You know.
Okay.
Can I just say, do you not think, in a way, I think it's very interesting, the whole kind of shift of perspective you've given it, but then coming right back to the commerce and the moment between fashion and art, isn't everything slightly formulaic at this point anyway? And that's part of the struggle, and we're sort of trying to collide and ask this question between this blurring place. Can it exist, can't exist, but that's why I say there shouldn't be categories. It's really got to be driven. I think if there's something pure that you want to say, it doesn't matter whether you want to do it in dress or somewhere between dress and art, paint, sculpture, film, all those different mediums. And I think what's really, it's just really what, for really me, when I see everything, it's very difficult. You just see everything is very geared towards the monetization of the stages in someone's life or what goes next, and it's what drives people so much, and it's destructive. It's destructive in education. It's destructive in culture.
Totally agree.
We've just come from through such an incredibly capitalistic, powerful time, and are in the midst of it. And I feel, in a way, for me, great conversation, but we can go around and try and kind of pinpoint it all. But I want us to move forward culturally and be responsible for something where, we're not trying to slice it and position ourselves, because if you position and you categorize, it means you're doing it to monetize, to write the book, to be in the right play, to be in the right exhibition. And I think, bizarrely, to bring it right back to glass dress, it's interesting that collision, or that at least attempt to collide worlds and dialogues together. They might not be perfect, but I just think we're in 2014 and we're still kind of separating everything. We separate it to make money, not to express.
I think there is also, though, there is a need to talk about things, and you have to say what things are if you're going to discuss them. I mean, it's a constant problem. In that, you know, I work in the music world day to day, and I've heard this great record, and the first question you ask is, "What's it like?" You know, and there is a kind of human need to separate. That goes beyond that, I think.
But they say that if you put everything in boundaries, you kind of miss the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And I think just culturally, we're super smart. At this point, we don't need to do that. We've got to demand difference. Otherwise, we're going to be doing the same thing in another 10 years. Same record industry, art industry.
Okay.
Yeah, it stops.
Well, in that case, let's move it forward a little bit, and let's go with this idea of kind of taking it forward. Who are the designers, the fashion's true artists who will be remembered, and they won't be those. You were talking about those forgotten 19th century masters. Who are the people working today who'll be remembered in 100 years' time? Do you guys think? Anybody want to jump in?
Well, I mean, I've got personal favourites that just do parody the relationship between fashion artists. That's the territory I'm interested in. But I guess back to this idea of trying to create something new and lead people on a new journey to create a new language, or in a way like get people to see things differently, because that's part of the challenge. Mm-hmm. I mean, sorry, I'm going off on a rant, but I think, designers that do that, for me, like Moschino, when he was alive, he was quite a good, he had injected this sense of irreverence and fun and almost a sense of artistry into making clothes. It wasn't really about fashion, it was more about ideas and fun. And then even like Castelbajac is in a little way a bit like that. You know, he definitely treats his fashion as a sort of extension of his art, really. And that's, I mean, so they're quite good examples of things that have managed to become successful brands in some sense. And yeah, because I think the very difficult thing as a creative is you put your flag out there on new territory conceptually, and you understand it and you want people to follow, but obviously people are so used to pigeonholing in the wrong but so whether it'll actually stick or people will follow, I don't know.
Anybody else like to name names?
Well,
Yeah,
I think it's, if you're looking back, I mean, I think something like Balenciaga, I mean, obviously just move things on, and the whole issue about craft and, you know, the idea of what it is to be a great couturier. I mean, he really absolutely nailed it. And then I think you've obviously got, you know, people like Ray with Comme des Garçons, and the people who've reinvented and moved things on, and people like Yoji. And then if you think about the debates at the moment, you know, James referred to McQueen. I mean, there is no question about what he did and how he moved things on. And I think it's still quite difficult, because picking up on some of the points that Zoe was making earlier, I think that the monetarization of fashion is really strong at the moment. And I think one of the, so in a way I'm going to say just something slightly different, which is also where people are taking the brands so you look at somebody, you know, people have attempted to say, look at Ozzy Clark and say, okay, we're going to relaunch that brand again, and actually have missed the idea totally of the motivation of somebody like Ozzy Clark and why he was so seminal and exciting. And they you know, it closed, they couldn't do it. And there are a number of people trying to sort of look at, you know, having a resurgence in a brand that was very strong, and trying to put a designer in there, which is links to that monetarization. So that idea of what the vision is, you know, for some people who are creative, they happen to express themselves through the medium of fashion. But the idea that you can simply lock into that and redo it, I think something like Sarah Burton in McQueen is, you know, she's moving it on, but whether it's in her own way, which is quite interesting. And then you've got people like the sort of Christopher Kane's, J.W. Anderson, who's also been quite interesting because of what he's doing. But there are very few.
Sorry to interrupt. My only question with these guys often is that they're not necessarily reinventing the concept of what fashion is. They're maybe just beautifully flying the flag of fashion that's done well. But I don't believe they're sort of avant-gardely reinventing the whole notion of how people see clothing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe.
Christopher Kane had a bit of an Andy Warhol reference with his camel prints recently, didn't he? They look pretty similar to a few of the Warhols.
But I feel that fashion is so actually, it's a bit like art in the 19th century. It's got such a narrow vision of what the art is. I mean, even if you look at how the catwalk show as a form of presentation is such a sort of has such a stranglehold on how fashion designers are to present themselves. And I think if you even look at that, you know, brands in my mind should be reinventing themselves. They should be giving the public a trip on how they gauge and buy into the brand.
I think that's a really good point, and it is one I would like to pick up on. And that idea that, you know, the commerce and the money is a problem, because it makes people scared to be confrontational, which is an important part of moving things on. And I think you sometimes see that in both the art world and the fashion world.
Trying new things, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I feel a bit out of my depth now. It's a bit like that bit in Deliverance where the guy who plays the guitar. I was going to say Georgia Asda. But I think he's dead right. I think you're dead right about that, because I think people do get scared to change, because it becomes a machine, doesn't it? Everything becomes a machine. And Runnels, I read this thing recently that said that the reason that a pair of railway tracks is the distance apart it is because of the width of a Roman horse's arse. Wow. And because of the width of a Roman horse, this certain breed of horse, the wheels were always the same distance apart, which meant that the tracks became cut into the ground, which meant that all the carts were the same size. So when they first started making the iron horse, the tracks were exactly the width of a Roman horse's arse. Which is kind of the way we...
Is that where we are now? How do we move past that? Because, for example, you know, you talk about the 19th century.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Talk about the 19th century and, you know, the salon, for example, and how hard it was to get in there. And then the Impressionists, didn't they, decided that they would exhibit outside, that they would have their own exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately...
Who's going to do that? And who are our fashion pioneers who are going to...
As a creative, you're always limited by your technical materials, so the way to genuinely create is to really contextualize, to represent, and say to someone, look, here, I'm going to show you a glass bottle, but you're going to think of it differently. So we're going to reinvent the concept, the actual...
I think that's what's happening now with the digital world. And
I think there's so many fast streaming, a catwalk show...
Can I just finish what I was saying?
Yeah, I apologise. Yeah.
But when I look at what's happening with all the students and the whole role of fashion and film and the sort of convergence, again, it comes back to the point that Zoe was making earlier, which was about the convergence of a whole range of disciplines, whether it's to do with graphics, fine art, live art, performance, film, and using clothing as an integral part of that, and music. And that's where I think, it's still quite early days, but that's where there are significant numbers of students wishing to come and study and explore these ideas more than in some of the other more traditional forms of what fashion might be. And that's one of the things I think is quite interesting. It's the role that clothes play in something which is much more digitally focused.
Okay,
I think, sorry, just to add to that, if you want to bring in fashion and art back together and that back together again in this conversation, that purity, I think you're very right, but the beginnings of something new has to be allowed to play beyond money. And that's when we'll start seeing things that have, and that needs to be non-categorized, and I think then, and we're just not allowing that at this point. We're in a society where it's really bullish and it's really tough, and it's got these very, very strong in art and fashion, and that's because we're comfortable with categories, we can control them, but I think new is exciting. I mean, to be 9 years old and where your language is coding, and you can also access history dramatically in a heartbeat, you have the whole universe in your lap. There's a spirit, and in a way I'm like, yeah, that's a buzz. As long as we remove economy. As soon as economy drops in,
okay,
you go back to the
Because
arts.
artists are always trapped by their own success. If they make a particular type of work, the gallery and the collectors will only want to stick with that. And if they want,
they're patrons in the old days, right?
But if they want to be, more inventive and create a totally new thing, the gallery will say, no, we can't sell that. The collectors will want to buy your seminal work, and that's trouble. That's how it's become.
Do you think there's a kind of happy collaboration to be had between the two worlds? What could they learn from each other, do you think? About that, about balancing, artistic creativity and commerce.
Fashion world needs to give more money to the art world.
Okay.
They've got all the money.
Okay.
They just need to have fantastic art collections, as well as warehouses full of clothes that no one's ever worn. That's all,
All right.
See, I think fashion designers think that artists have it easy, because fashion designers see their artist mates flogging a painting for 15 grand, and they think to make 15 grand, they've probably got to sell 100 grand worth of clothes because they'll lose so much in production.
Yeah, but how much do you make on the 15 grand painting by the time you paid the gallery 50% and all the rest?
And
of
if it's still compared to your raw material markup, it's often not for all
it does
artists,
depend what you make, doesn't it?
Yeah, quite. But
I wonder what you found it like working in the fashion industry a little bit, albeit in music. I mean, I would imagine it could actually be quite refreshing to be in an industry where that price point and that, the commercial bottom line was out there from the beginning.
It was ridiculous, though. When I worked at Fendi, it was like there was a white room and you went in there, there was just like all these lamps on, these huge blondes on all the time, and everybody was wearing dark glasses or you couldn't see. And it was so hot in there, they had all these air conditioners running all the time, and there was this big long table covered in magazines, and Carl sitting in the middle, at first with his fan, and then all these people coming and going all the time, and piles of tat like you've never seen, mountains of handbags and shoes. And they'd just bring them up and it'd be like, and things would be getting thrown out, and new things would be coming in, and models would be being casted, and then Andre Leontelli would come in, and this person, that person, and it was just it was a circus. It was insane. It was insane, and the money, you could smell the money going down the loo right there, and then you could feel it happening right in front of you. It was just crazy. I mean, just the music that I did. By the end of it, I was hiring drummers, bass players, brass sections. I was going to recording studios with the Chemical Brothers as we were walking out the door and recording things 48 tracks high, specifying a 48-channel recording system, playing it all back as individual tracks and moving it all around the room. It's costing 100,000 quid for 13 minutes of music. I mean, it was just...
But that's not fashion design.
It's insanity.
That's a big corporate company that happens.
So I don't know. I came out of there thinking, what was all that about?
Okay. I'm going to bring Nina in here, because I haven't heard from Nina for a while. Nina, your work's all about helping young artists, young designers fulfill their potential, and of course opening up access for them to do so. Do you think that there's maybe a little bit of snobbery at play, an agenda at play in the idea of talking about fashion as art, kind of making it rarefied and not democratized, not for everybody?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we basically promote scholarship opportunities for students from the Middle East, students who don't have access to fashion education. Fashion education is pretty much non-existent within the Middle East. So they have this opportunity to come over to London to be able to be in that kind of environment and to be around other people to to express themselves creatively. And but I mean, it's very new. It's a very new market for them.
Okay, so what advice do you give them when they're going to set out and try and make a living in this world?
Don't take no for an answer.
Is that good advice, Francis?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, let's talk about materials for a little while. James, you've curated the glass dress exhibition, which is here at the LCF and at the Wallace Collection. Can fashion be made from any material or medium?
Fashion or art, we talking
Fashion. Well, there's the nub, isn't it? But in this case, let's say fashion, because I think we're kind of assuming art can.
Yeah, I don't know, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
depends how wearable it is, doesn't it? I don't know. I don't
Can't make fashion out of poo.
making fashion, but
It'd be funny to try.
Well, maybe have a go, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't
Make
maybe
poo
better
fashion.
talk to
James.
Philip about that because he's making things out of unusual materials. But I mean, generally, if we're talking about art, yes, the sky's the limit. You can make it out of any material, you know.
Okay. Well, let's take it back to fashion. Philip, I wonder what the most challenging material you've worked with is.
Yeah, I've tried to do sort of literal dresses where I've got almost like canvas and cut them up and then painted on top, like to look like sloppy cut out canvas from the wall that's been made into dresses. And that's got a bit sloppy at times. I remember I did a thing for the Hay Festival, Hay on Wye Festival. I did a talk there, and so we made this book dress for a model to wear, and but it looked really sloppy. I think I was like, oh God, hide the pictures.
Okay.
But,
Zoe, what about you?
I mean, yeah, we've worked in loads and loads different, from gazelles that are beautiful and from Italy and jacquards to steel and brass and 3D printing to, for me, a dress can be an image, it can be a piece of film, it can be, you know, it can be something way more abstract than that. And so we're kind of very open and broad in our use of material, and put it in front of us, we'll use it.
Have you worked with glass yet?
Yes, part of glass dress.
Okay, great.
And did printing with glass once, actually.
Tell me
Screen
about that.
printing.
Okay.
I mean,
On it all, with it.
yeah, just broken, what they used to call Hackney Diamonds kind of inspired moment, but in
Hackney
black.
Diamonds.
Yeah.
Oh, they sound fantastic. Fancy wearing a few of those. Well, Paul, obviously you've got you're exhibiting too. Why did you decide to work with glass? And tell me about the pieces of yours that are in the exhibition.
Well, I'd only used glass technically before, and so by technical glass I mean stuff like float glass and toughened glass and borosilicate glass, which is basically glass you can pressurise or glass you can bend, but it's the kind of glass used in industry. And then I had the opportunity, James gave me the opportunity to work with these people who are basically artisans, and it's hundreds of years old, and they actually blow the glass, and it's a completely different vibe. So I was going to make something technical, and then I saw them doing this, and I was just really jealous of everybody else doing it. So I threw my idea out and came back with a new idea and made these blobular plop things, which are basically water droplets photographed at high speed and then rendered in glass, which, as you pointed out, is interesting because glass is still liquid.
Glass is actually a liquid.
Still a liquid,
Yeah,
actually.
still
Yeah, I
on
mean,
fact out
I
there.
think Paul's thing fulfilled the main criteria of the show, actually. He's one of the few artists that actually work with them. It was great.
I'm going back next week as well. I loved it so much. I'm
And
going
then
back,
everybody
yeah.
did, thought, oh, that's not typical Paul Fryer work, so he took a big risk. He went out there and...
Well, for me, but I was backed up because I had the nebula in the background, which I'd already made. So I had a backup. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it would have been humiliating to go in there and come out with a load of absolutely horrible blobular mess, which could have happened. But that's the excitement of it, because just to talk more generally, really quickly about making work, I realised recently that there are two kinds of making work. There's prescriptive, where you've got a target and you try and hit the target, and then there's open-ended working, which is what I'm trying to do more of these days, because if you're trying to hit a very specific target, i.e. you're employing yourself to make something which you've thought of, then you can only really miss the target by a degree or so, whatever. You're going to miss it by a little bit, but if you leave it open-ended, then the target's much bigger and it's much more exciting. So that's the way I like to work.
So is that like a trajectory, or do you have
you
an
kind of
end
point yourself in a
target?
direction and see what happens,
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys can relate to, our designers at the other end of the
Yeah,
panel?
I would say that would be the way we are working, and I have to say it's really nice.
maybe
It's really scary.
Yeah, it is scary.
Because
but
you
maybe
let
that's come
go,
from
and
more
sometimes
like
you
a
make
fashion
things that are
angle.
really crap and shit, and you get totally depressed. And
People come in and laugh
but
at
it's
it.
really, really. I have to say, I think it's It's to give yourself that printing. What do you say?
People come in and laugh at it.
I just let people in.
It's happened to me anyway. People come in
People
and
have come in and laughed at your work.
Something I was making, yeah. And then said, I'm sorry.
When it was halfway through. What do you do in that situation?
You've got to laugh along, haven't you? You know, it's dangerous. It's like,
That's good.
yeah, I think it's,
I mean, pushing the boundaries is interestingly something that, you know, the fashion world and the art world have in common, and they're kind of yen to do that. Do you think that desire tends to have more integrity in one world than the other to push boundaries? Are people pushing boundaries for commercial success more in the fashion world? What do you think, Francis?
I mean, I think again it comes back to this idea about what motivations are, and what I hope certainly within the college is that the students come to understand that it's always about pushing the boundaries. If you're not stretching things, if you're not prepared to fail, and for people to come and laugh at what you've done, or for the thing to not work or not hang together, then in a way you're always pulling back, and you're always working within a convention that's already established. So I think it's really important, that idea of failure is a key part of the learning process, and should never finish at whatever stage of your creative life, that journey that you've got is crucial. And I think within the college, for me, doing exhibitions like the White Light Glass Dress is about the idea, it's like the what if question. What if, we take a medium like grass and put, designers and artists together just to see what happens? If we can't do it within a creative organisation, where is that going to happen? Because it comes back to that idea of the marketplace. In a way, institutions are one of the only places left at the moment where you can ask those what if questions, because you're not being told, well, how many are you going to sell? Am I going to get my 50% back, or whatever it is? We can speculate, and I think that's really important. And I think that relationship between the two, because you've got on the one hand something that's more commercial, as allegedly, and something that's much more creative and unbound, and what happens when you put them together.
I found it very interesting coming to the LCF show, the graduate show, a couple of years back, and somebody there that night, I can't remember who it was, said to me that kind of this is the most it's the creative high point, because the students that are showing, they have, as you say, no brief, no kind of commercial brief to fulfill. They can do whatever they want. They can spend all this time putting their show together. Is that what you love about working at LCF?
It is, and I mean, it's really exciting because every year you get more students in, all feeling really hopeful, aspirational, anxious, nervous, wanting to create and contribute something. And what you hope you do is help them uncover what their particular idea, vision, understanding is. And you've got to give them space and time. You've got to make them aware that they are part of an industry. It's got to have some sort of application. And we do a lot of industry projects and placements and all sorts of things. So they've got that 1 foot in. But it is a precious time, because when you get out, you start to have the confines. And hopefully that experience is what's going to sustain you, because you know where your ideas are coming from and how to push. And you should be pushing against, even when you're in the industry.
And can you bring your experience in the art world and as an artist to bear on your job day to day?
I know I do that. I mean, I haven't made work for a long time, but I know that I'm putting it there, if you see what I mean.
The energy comes from the same place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And my belief in creativity and its relationship to education.
Okay. Nina, I just wanted to ask your opinion on the kind of that idea of students and how important that time, that kind of incubation period that Francis was talking about is in the long term. Why is that something that you've put so much energy into supporting as an experience for people?
Well, I think just the fact that they are pursuing their skills, developing their ideas, developing the confidence to express their ideas when they finally graduate, when they go on developing, I don't know, in the commercial world. I think it's the educational aspect of it is incredibly important. And for students in the Middle East, for example, where they don't have access to that, a lot of them, they are dissuaded, they're discouraged from following their dreams or their aspirations in the fashion world or in the arts world. So I think this opportunity is really important for them.
And was it clear to you from the outset that you didn't want to delineate and make the scholarships just about visual art, that you always wanted it to be broader than that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's about supporting creativity as a whole. And I think in a region where the image and the media that it's receiving right now, there's this other aspect to it that is not being shown, and it's about, you know, you get these young artists and young designers popping up everywhere, and there's not enough awareness around them. So I think to support creativity, whether it's art, whether it's fashion, whether it's theatre, whether it's writing, I mean, all of it needs to be, you know, to come out. Yeah.
And do you think that fashion is something that can help break down cultural barriers and help, you know, help people understand other cultures better? And
yeah, interestingly, there is this fashion blog in Iran. It's called Tehran Times, and I was looking at it the other day, and it's Tehran street style. And the blogger, he takes pictures of women, men in the street using fashion and art to express themselves where they couldn't actually verbalize it, but they use it in a very specific way. It's a really interesting combination of the two. So yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's amazing the way that fashion travels. Incredible. I mean, to me, that is the strength it has over art. You know, galleries, often stuff is stuck on the wall or in the space, whereas fashion, you can take it into the space, you can take it out of the space, you can. It infects people. Do you know what I mean? It's contagious, and it travels the world. You know, like even if you put, as a designer, you put stuff out there, you find that people picking up on it, especially now, as you were saying, with the global age and digital world, people pick on it everywhere. You know, so you can connect to people everywhere, and so it's quite incredible the way you can create sort of a movement of ideas in almost like a uniform.
I mean, obviously that's something that you're very comfortable
very
with, but I wonder whether everybody is, because that is the thing about fashion, that it's, you know, it's personal and people take their own spin on your work.
Enough personality, individual. I think that again, you know, fashion is very, very driven by the multiple, number one. So actually they want it to be more multiple, but I think I wish we lived in braver times. I think visually.
But I think there is time of change in the sense that.
Yeah,
punk rock.
That was great.
well, there's a whole mixture, and I think not every woman would go out in the lovely sequin.
No, of course not. But I mean, I guess with even I guess even like in an artist's world, you create your showpieces and then you have your screen prints and your limited edition, blah blah blah. And within a designer's world, you create your impact, your dream, your craziness. But then you still scale it down to lesser degrees so that people can still buy into the escapist world, but in a pair of underpants, you know. But they're still getting.
I've often wanted to get into the escapist world in a pair of underpants.
But you know, it's about getting it. But it's all ultimately any of it's just about communicating ideas. At the end of the day, whether you're buying a print on the wall or whether you're buying your boxer shorts, it's about. I think that the trick with either is magic. You're trying to create a form of like, with a lot of brands, it's like the magic is the allure of the lifestyle they're selling or whatever. But it's some sort of a dream, do you know? And I think that. The degree, the sort of moving forward for me, it's about how much more you can excite and reinvent a dream that's already, because some dreams are a bit boring now, you know, we've seen them, we've been there.
So you're creating a dream. Are you creating a dream for your market? And does that mean that you're thinking of your buyer, your consumer, when you're designing? Because that seems to be the opposite of what you were saying, that, you know, you have an internal process.
I just try not to do that, because if you do, then you end up making an artwork for X collector because you know he likes X, and then.
But there's two things. Because you've got your collectors,
you can't.
But you've also got a language, because people understand things through association. So in a way, your understanding of how people read and the things, the contextual environment people are used to seeing, you know, what they're used to seeing. You can play on that with your creativity.
I believe in the power of the unconscious. You see, if I have an idea, I tend to push it out of my mind as much as possible, and I keep pushing it down and pushing it down and pushing it down, and then eventually it just boils over. You can't keep it down anymore, and that's when the interesting stuff happens.
But are you sure
I try not to use my conscious mind to invent or come up with ideas, because invariably they're second rate.
But it's hard, really.
Like you say, they're magic. They're magic.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, it's pretty usual, isn't it, for fashion designers to have an art collection? I think if you know, people had a kind of commercially successful fashion house, you'd probably expect them to have some art in their house.
Think, wouldn't you?
You would. Karl Lagerfeld, as I mentioned.
He doesn't have any of my work.
Does he?
I
I'm
just
told he's
know
a
him because I used to
collector.
work with him. No, that's not true.
Oh.
Damien does, but no, I don't know any.
Damien had, well, yes, but...
No, I don't think there are any fashion people who collect my work yet.
Okay. Well, I wondered whether the relationship was reciprocated, and that, you know,
Like
artists
fashion.
tend to be well dressed. or
Well,
very particular about their dress.
It's true. I think that's true. I think when you look around artists, they're very comical. They either have a little. I mean, I have two kinds of dress really. I have a uniform thing which I wear all the time, it's just like black and white, because then I don't have to think. And then I'm very fond of various things, which and I bemoan the fate of Church's shoes, for instance, and because of Prada's involvement and whatever, and get involved in all these little things. But in the end, I think everybody does, don't they? Because you can't help it. I mean, we're all vain, aren't we, really? I think at the end of the day, most of us anyway.
Is that something that you find, Zoe? I would imagine that Boudicca is a fashion house that really appeals to people with an artistic leanings of their own.
Yes, individuals, bring them on, all welcome. Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is that you make things and then you have private clients, but a lot of them go somewhere that you have no idea of who connects to that. But I would say, yeah, I think there's a certain, I don't know, sorry, I just need to get my head clear. What do I think? Do they have to be brave, don't they? You can break it apart and have a little piece of what we do, and it can be the way you wish it to be, or you can have elements where you're doing, you have to be really brave, and I wouldn't even wear them. So, but I think, I don't know, again, sorry to be really a pain, but I hate the categorizing of art people versus fashion people. What do they do? There are some really great dresses out there, and there's some really, very conservative dresses out there.
Let me ask you another question then.
Yeah.
How comfortable are you with the idea that by just putting your work on, people kind of personalise it, they adapt it themselves?
I love it. Completely.
That's a positive.
I wouldn't want people to wear head to toe. I mean, they can if they want. It's just their deal. It's their choice. It's. I don't think about it that way. Mm-hmm. I think when you design, yes, there's a sort of slightly, maybe fascistic element in you demanding. I don't know. They say, is it fun or fascistic? Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Francis, would you say that Zoe's attitude is typical of designers, that they're quite comfortable with people putting their own spin on what they create?
I think once you've done it and it's in the shops, or even with your clients, actually you lose control of it. It's a bit like, work of art. You can't dictate how people are going to read it or appreciate it. And I think the thing I'm most interested in, again, when fashion becomes sort of about style, that people evolve their own style. It's a bit like people talk about Prada, Zara. The people who they'll wear, Zara t-shirt, whatever it is, and Prada coat, or the idea with something vintage. And I think again it comes back to the idea of being brave and creative and saying something with your clothes rather than being head to toe in just a designer, watching to see what's coming out and then just going out and buying the whole collection and just wearing it. Actually, that's not very creative. That's just showing you've got a lot of money.
But there was a trend, wasn't there, I think, when the beginning of that kind of globalization of fashion happened, that a lot was kind of controlled by a big company would only allow editorial where their whole look was shot. Whereas, the culture that as a student I grew through, which was the face and blitz and ID, that no one was, again, kind of on that journey to a sort of, it was just a different time. And so I think stylists and those magazines sort of painted weird montaged images together about like kind of how they felt. And it was very much about you as an individual. It was a much more smaller group of people. Like you can hear someone like Fran Lebowitz say that there was a certain period, if you saw Interview magazine in New York, you knew that person was part of your tribe. Whereas now everything, exponentially, the kind of creative industry and the fashion world is just, we're just incredibly sophisticated and it's spread much further. And yeah.
Paul, that kind of connects with what you were saying about punk, really, doesn't it?
I keep thinking about punk listening to this.
Yeah.
Because that's when I got into that, we didn't have any money in Leeds, so I just got one of my dad's old jackets and cut holes in it and put chewing gum on it and stuck safety pins through it and chains and went down the youth club and get my head kicked in. And that's what you did, And I had long hair and I dyed it green, and it didn't matter because you just did. Punk was just about doing the opposite of what everybody was doing at that moment and just being completely your own identity, which is why I think that's kind of the most interesting thing, which is why I really resonate with what Zoe's saying.
And that was kind of why I wanted to really ask about confrontation before and the idea of confrontation, because I do feel that You see it in music as well, which I think is, again, another parallel world, really, where they're all interlinked and interdependent.
Yeah.
And people are scared to be
They are,
confrontational.
but I think again it comes back to this idea of a consumerist society, which is so pervasive. And you think about again for you can see it with students. They have to obviously take out quite significant loans to be able to come and study, which is going to what am I going to do to get a first? I need to get a job. I need to pay it back. So again, is this constant sort of sense of holding back and not confronting, because it might sort of ruin your chances of getting some sort of employment. So I think it's been a very sort of subtle and insidious sort of marketisation of everything.
And now they're selling the loans to loan sharks.
I know.
I can't believe it.
I feel like
It's
we're running out of time,
Insane.
and I feel like we've come to the end of the discussion, and we've really just reached the Harry Hill point, which is that we all agree that fashion can be art, but that it might need to be settled and indeed made better by a giant fight. That seems to be where we've got to. I think we need Harry Hill for discussion number 3. Thank you very much to our panellists. They've been absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much to you guys for being here. And that concludes this masterclass. Solved. Mystery solved. Not solved. But it was fun. Not solved. Everything's solved.
Should have a little